Deep in the fog-drenched mountains, Min thought he left the red eyes behind, but some shadows never stay in the dark. Red Eyes in the Tunnel, submitted by Thuy Tran. The air was thick with fog as Min drove through the narrow, winding roads of the mountains outside of Hanoi. It was the kind of night where everything felt slightly off, too quiet, too still, as if the world was holding its breath. He had driven this road many times before, a shortcut through the remote countryside, but tonight, something felt different. Up ahead was an old tunnel carved through the mountains decades ago, mostly forgotten by the modern world. Some said it was cursed, that strange things happened to those who passed through it at night. Others dismissed it as superstition, the kind of ghost story the villagers like to tell to scare travelers from the city. Min had never believed the stories. He had driven through the tunnel dozens of times without incident. But tonight, as the fog thickened, obscuring the road ahead, he felt a shiver crawl up his spine. His headlights barely cut through the mist, the beams fading into the swirling fog. The tunnel loomed in front of him, its mouth a gaping black hole, the walls cracked and overgrown with moss. He slowed the car, gripping the wheel tighter. The road was empty. No other cars, no travelers, nothing. But as he approached the entrance, something caught his eye. A pair of red lights, glowing faintly, deep within the tunnel. At first, he thought they were the taillights of a vehicle. But as he got closer, he realized something was wrong. The lights didn't move. They stayed perfectly still, hovering in the darkness, unblinking. Min's heart pounded in his chest. He told himself it was nothing, just a reflection, maybe the remnants of an old signal light. But the lights, they looked like eyes. He drove slower, inching forward into the tunnel. The rustling sound of leaves echoed from the mountain's edge, and he saw movement, stray dogs pacing at the entrance, their fur bristling, their eyes wide and alert. One of them snarled, its teeth bared toward the tunnel as if it sensed something Min couldn't see. A chill ran down his spine. As his car entered the tunnel, the air grew colder. The lights, those red, unblinking eyes, seemed to grow brighter, more intense. Min glanced at his rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone or something following him. The tunnel stretched on, the darkness closing in around him. He could hear the engine of his car, but it sounded muffled, distant, as though the tunnel was swallowing the sound. And then, just as he reached the center, the chanting began. It was faint at first, barely more than a whisper carried on the cold air. But it grew louder, echoing off the stone walls, a low, rhythmic chant in Vietnamese. Min couldn't make out the words, but he knew what it was: blessings, prayers for protection. The kind of chant his grandmother used to say when they passed a shrine or a temple, asking the spirits to keep them safe. But there was no shrine here. No temple, only the tunnel, and those eyes still watching him. The chanting grew louder, more urgent, as if the voices were pleading with him, warning him to turn back. The air felt heavier now, thick with something he couldn't name. He tried to speed up, but his foot seemed stuck on the pedal. The car barely moved, as if the tunnel itself was holding him in place. And then, the red eyes disappeared. They blinked out of existence, leaving nothing but darkness ahead. But Min could still feel them, watching, waiting. He glanced in the rearview mirror again, his hand shaking on the wheel. The fog outside the tunnel seemed to swirl with a life of its own, twisting and curling like fingers reaching out for him. The stray dogs at the entrance had gone silent, their eerie howls echoing in his mind. Min pressed the pedal harder, forcing the car to move faster, his heart racing in his chest. The chanting, the eyes, the cold air, it all felt too real, too close. He had to get out of the tunnel. He had to leave before whatever was lurking in the darkness claimed him too. As Min pressed harder on the gas, the car seemed to struggle, the engine groaning as if it, too, was trapped in the tunnel's suffocating grip. The fog outside thickened, swirling like a living thing, wrapping around the car like tendrils. He could barely see the road ahead now, the headlights swallowed by the mist. And then the rustling sound returned, closer this time, like something was moving just beyond his sight. He strained to see through the fog, his pulse quickening as the sound grew louder, more insistent. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the leaves. It was something else. The red eyes flickered back into view. But this time, they were closer, much closer. Min's breath caught in his throat as the eyes hovered just ahead of him, glowing faintly through the haze. They didn't blink, didn't move. They just stared, unblinking, unyielding. The dogs at the entrance had scattered, but now he heard something else. Low growls echoing from the shadows at the edge of the tunnel. Strays didn't usually act this way, not unless they sensed something. Min's hand shook on the steering wheel, his knuckles white as he forced the car to keep moving. The chanting returned, louder than before. The voices echoed off the tunnel's walls, bouncing back and forth in a haunting symphony. Minh could hear them clearly now, words of blessing, of protection. But there was something desperate in the chant, something pleading, as if the voices were trying to warn him, trying to save him from whatever was lurking just ahead. A shiver ran down his spine. His grandmother had always told him to respect the spirits, to never anger them, to always offer a prayer when passing a shrine. But there were no shrines here, no things, only the tunnel, and the presence that seemed to grow stronger with every passing second. The red eyes moved again, darting to the side, disappearing into the shadows. Min's heart pounded in his chest. He tried to speed up, but it was like driving through quicksand. The car barely moved, the wheels spinning as if stuck in place. And then he saw it, a figure in the fog. It stood at the edge of the road, just beyond the reach of his headlights, barely visible through the swirling mist. It was tall, impossibly tall, its outline barely more than a shadow, its features obscured by the thick fog. But the eyes, the red eyes, were there, staring back at him, unblinking. Min's hands trembled on the wheel. He could feel the weight of the figure's gaze, the intensity of its presence pressing down on him, suffocating him. He wanted to look away, but he couldn't. His eyes were locked on the figure, his breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. The chanting grew louder still, almost deafening now, as if the voices were inside the car with him. He could feel them, their presence like a cold wind brushing against his skin. The figure took a step forward, its eyes burning like embers in the fog, and Minh knew he had to get out. His foot slammed on the gas, and the car lurched forward, the engine roaring as it fought to escape the tunnel's grip. The red eyes disappeared again, swallowed by the darkness, but the figure remained, watching, waiting. Minh could feel its gaze on him even as the car sped out of the tunnel, the fog thinning as he merged into the night. The chanting faded, replaced by the sound of his own labored breathing, the rush of blood in his ears. He didn't stop driving until he reached the safety of the village, his hands still shaking on the wheel. But even then, even as the lights of the houses came into view, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed him. Something was still watching. As he glanced in the rearview mirror one last time, he saw them, those red eyes, glowing faintly in the distance, just beyond the reach of the light. The villagers had warned him about the tunnel, but he hadn't listened. And now, no matter where he went, he knew he would never forget the red eyes in the tunnel,